Okay, I can go. Yes! Hello, and hello again to some of you. Because as this part of the slide says, my name is Steve, and as that part of the slide says, I'm a bit of a geek. If we've all turned up to the right room, I'm going to be talking about how I composed a symphony with JavaScript. Now, it's not the React talk if you were wondering. My React talk would basically be, it sucks, but you get a job. End. This, how many of them did I divide with that comment? Oh, only a couple, not so bad. Okay, so symphony number one, because I've only written one, and I kind of like the old traditional way of doing things. So over the course of the next 20-25 minutes, I'm going to be talking about that symphony, the origins of it, its creation process, and the other stuff that sort of went along with it. It's quite old. I started this way back in the 90s. There were probably some of you that weren't even born in the 90s. It's that long ago. So in 1996, and I had to look this up for my own records, I was reading a book. Those are the paper things, by the way. And there was this comment in there about a composer called Georges Ligeti. And there was a thing that he'd written, which was fairly modern, and it was 100 metronomes, all ticking at a slightly different tempo. And I thought, that's quite interesting. Not because musically it might be interesting, but the idea that you would just have seemingly random events coming from metronomes, of them going into sequence and coming out again. I thought, I wonder what that sounds like. That must be quite interesting. Now, to also give some context of 1996, Amazon wasn't there. It was 1 year old and only sold books. So not going to be able to get this recording of Georges Ligeti that way. eBay was a year old, Google was nowhere near, and YouTube still 9 years away. Now if you want to get some music, you just go to YouTube. It's pretty much all there. But this poem symphonique was not there. It was also not in my local library. I grew up in a place in the middle of nowhere where the local library had cassette tapes and not much else, and certainly would not have Georges Ligeti. So I had no choice. I'd have to play it myself. But I'm not in the general idea of, I will just go to the music shop and buy 100 metronomes. That was a bit too much, but I had an idea. I'd just code it myself, which I did. I wrote a MIDI library. The first one was in C, the later one is in JavaScript, and I just went away line by line by line and wrote it. Sounded awful. Complete and utter waste of time. But it did give me an idea. This is what he came up with in the 60s. It's the 60s modernist composition. He had metronomes. He could do that. But I thought, I have a computer. I'm not limited to whatever a little box of wood will tick. I can generate notes. I can change these notes. I can do anything I want. So the first idea I had was not very original, to be honest. And it was this. I started off, I had one note in a bar. I then put two notes in a bar. I then put, you can see where this is going, right? Does anyone want to guess on how far I pushed this joke? Up to 32 beats in a bar. And I thought, okay, this will be one note, this will be another note, maybe a third or a fifth higher. This will be the note maybe a seventh up, and an octave up, and so forth. I'll use a piano, because that's a nice simple instrument. It's got the range, whereas a lot of other instruments in the orchestra have got this only sort of 2-octave range. I wanted a big range, because I wanted 32 notes playing simultaneously. And I wrote the code, I put this in, and it didn't sound awful. I'll play you an excerpt, if I can remember what I called it. That one, I think. 2, 3. You get the idea. Yes, I don't think Brittany's got anything to worry about, but For me, it was like, this would not have been possible back in the day. It's only possible because the machine is precise enough to be able to play 31 notes in a bar and get every single one of them correct. As a musician, you can generally play 32 because you're used to that. You're used to playing 2s, 3s, 4s, sometimes 5s. But 31 for a human is almost impossible. So the machine was the only way to do it. But it's, as you can hear, it's quite funky. It's not very interesting. So I added 2 bits to this. I slowed it down. So over time, it gets slower and slower. And I created a morph. So it starts off as a piano, and it ends as a harp. So if I fast forward, just a quite sort of dreamy, sort of Saint-Saëns kind of a sound. But because it changes gradually over time, you don't obviously notice something's happening. And again, this is something that I was only able to do with the machine by making very slight adjustments to the sound every time programmatically. If you want to see some code, I might even have some. Ah, not yet. I've got some code later. So that was the first idea. I added a few tweaks to it. And it's the whole rule, I'm sure most of you have heard the rule, that most of work, especially creative work, is 90% inspiration and 10% perspiration. And that's exactly the way it should be, right? When, unfortunately, you spend all your time just faffing around trying to get things right, not that original 10% of inspiration. So we listened to it. So I wrote it. It came out my MIDI, and I thought, right, that's OK. Not going to break any world records, but it's okay. Then I thought, well, what else can I do? Essentially, all I'm doing is creating asynchronous rhythms. What else can I do that's asynchronous? If you want the code, that's the code. So I started thinking of other things and coming up with other ideas, because I've got the code now. I've written this library. I might as well use it. And I'd always had a fascination with fractals. Self-similar images, usually, which at one level look the same, and at a slightly deeper level also look the same. So I thought, is this possible with a composition? Can I have a melody line that goes from here to here, but if you take every other note, it plays the same melody line? And then you take every other note from that, and it produces another melody which is the same as the original, just half as long. And the answer is yes, you can. And if you do that, you do it programmatically, and then you double the length of each note. I wrote this, and it lasted a minute. And I thought, it's never going to get into the pop charts unless it's 4 minutes. So I repeated it 4 times. Steve Reich has taught me well, as has Philip Glass. So I told you there'd be music jokes. I just didn't tell you there would be funny music jokes. So I repeated it 4 times. I offset the starting note by a semiquaver every time so that the notes would fall into very slightly different places. Regenerated it. And it sounds something like this. And the symbol is there to sort of just remind me when one bit stops and the next bit starts up. It was not artistic. But of course, when you start getting these ideas and you've got that technology at hand, every single problem says, OK, I'm going to solve it with this tool. So I started doing more things on the idea of asynchronous rhythms. OK, I'll show you some code while I do that. So there's some code. I did change it slightly from the original. It originally was vars. I've changed it to let because that's more common. But my OpenOffice just puts capitals in there instead nowadays. But that's OK. And you can see it is really simple. You can create files with the library. You sync up the tracks because you're using time as I was talking about in the Web MIDI talk earlier on. MIDI itself doesn't really have the concept of time. The time it has is real-world time. You send a note message, you wait the right amount of real-world time, and then send the note off message. In a file, you have to store that as a difference in time, however many pulses per quarter note, and that number will vary on each track, so you have to then resync them up so everything's level. But otherwise, it's just a case of adding notes, and adding notes. And that's what one of the things looks like. It's not very interesting, I'm afraid, but it's music. It's meant to be listened to, apparently. So MIDI, and Web MIDI especially, does not have sound. It might seem weird for a sound library to have, but MIDI doesn't have sound. It just has the indication that there should be a sound. The MIDI file will say, I want a piano here. I want a violin there. It doesn't tell them how the piano should sound. It doesn't say how the violin should sound or what type of violin, or even if it's being plucked or bowed. Just, we want a violin. So all of this has to be realized. And for that, you need synthesizers, which I didn't bring, so I just brought this as an example that I can play a little bit. So the process is actually quite simple, and it's what you'd probably expect. You get the JavaScript to create the MIDI file. You listen to it. In my case, I used Cakewalk, which is now defunct. You listen through it, you think, I don't like the notes, or there are too many notes clustering up here. I'll put this an octave above. I don't like the speed, I'll slow it down, speed it up. Because all of the time, every single one of these is an experiment. There is no way of being able to predict ahead of time what it's going to sound like and if it's even going to sound any good. So load it up, listen to it, and then this is where the human part comes in. Do I like it? Do I see something in there? And a number of the times I didn't. I listened back and I thought, I've just wasted my evening. There's nothing in there. But every now and again, something will come up, and it's like, I didn't expect that. Let me explore that a bit further. There's always tricks, and it does feel sometimes that it is a little bit of a trickster thing, composing like this, as it probably would if you were doing it with AI, is that if you don't like that thing, you just keep changing the parameters until it does sound good. There is no real way of, with algorithmic music that I've found yet, that you can just say, I know this will be good if I just do that. It's always the case of just twiddling everything you can until either you get fed up and you're convinced there's nothing there, or it sounds reasonably good. Once you've done that, you decide what sounds you're going to have on it. Is it going to be the piano to harp thing? Is it going to be a lot of orchestral stuff? I did do a bit with a choir in it. And then you record it. And that's it. That's pretty much it done. I had some other ideas. I created the factor one, as I mentioned earlier. I also tried a thing with volume. Because you're able to change all these parameters, you can just play one chord for the entire piece and change the volume of those individual notes. I got the idea from Jean-Michel Jarre's Waiting for Cousteau, which was basically a 45-minute piece with 2 sounds in it. I thought, if he can get away with it, and I think it's that one. Those extra random, I think it's a sitar, not sitar, guitar, playing over the top. They're just random bits I put in there, but they're only random if you have no idea who I am. If you know who I am, then you'll know every important event in my life, and you'll know that I've transcribed my biorhythms, which are apparently true science, of my emotional states, my physical, and my, is it mental? The 3 biorhythms, which cadence in 28-day, 31-day, and 25-day cycles. So whenever those things coincide and things happen in my life, I made a note of them, and those notes are triggered at that part of the song. But to all intents and purposes, it's sort of ambient mood music. And I also did do an hour-long version of that one as well. I also introduced it with this as well, because I thought it'd be quite fun. So let's forward. Again, this section is all just one chord, which is C-sharp minor, and the volume of each note in that chord is going up and down gradually, in and out of phase. And that's the tinkle effect that says that was probably my birthday. Is biorhythms still a thing? Do people still do biorhythms? No. When I was younger and learning to code, every programming book I ever got seemed to have an example on how to draw biorhythms, because they're very simple to render. It's just a couple of sine waves. So my general thing has been to start simple and then get esoteric. You'll see some extra ideas. You'll hear something, go, I'm going to try that. It's all emergent. You never know what's coming out the end. So all you need to do is add a nice introduction to something and then add a nice ending. That's another one of those examples which is badly formatted, so I won't linger. Yeah, I tried doing a scale, so just one normal scale from C to C and repeat it very quickly. Meh. Broken melodies where I start all the notes at the same time and then gradually I move them off of that time, which is another thing which is very difficult for humans to play. You naturally will not follow in with the same beat that everyone else is going. So when you have to play it just a fraction of a second later or a fraction of a second before, it's very difficult to do it. So it's another one of these things where the machine is pretty much the only way of performing these pieces. So I'd written it, I'd recorded the demo at home, but I didn't have very nice synthesizers. So I found a recording studio in North London where I used to live and got it recorded properly. Also had to get it mastered. Now, recording things in a studio is easy, that's fine. You just pay the money and the engineers tweak all the knobs to make sure it works well. Mastering is another thing where you just have to give them money. But the thing that sounds good on your headphones will sound different on my headphones, to sound different coming out the speakers at home, to the recording studio speakers and to your machine. So there's a process called mastering, which all professional recordings go through, so it sounds good in any format. And that's just another expense. Basically, people sit there with computers and twiddle dials. And I have no idea why it's doing all that. And you make sure you get the lossless versions of everything, because MP3 is awful. And we're finished. Almost. After doing all this, I still had to come up with a cover for the album. And this is what I came up with. It's simple enough. Steve, my stage name for music, Symphony number 1, and a load of computer screens, which are, the full color pattern is in octal. Anyone here count in octal? You will now. The least significant bit on that side, most significant there. It goes from grey to white to yellow to black or dark, and then again, all the way through. This was also generated in JavaScript. I found an image, which was a little piece of clip art like that, and I rendered the whole thing out, and I think it's about a 2000 by 2000 PNG. I have no idea where the source to that bit is, however. I then had to create a biography myself. I've never had to do that as a musician before. So you have to go through and you've got to write nice little snappy things about why you are a very good composer and why people should listen to you. So you have to make up a load of guff, basically. Oh, and you need a photograph. I don't photograph well. There's only 2 pictures of me in existence that I like. And believe it or not, that's one of them. So you've got to sort of go. You think that doing the music is the sort of the end of the journey. And then it starts getting hard work, and you've then got to start promoting it. You've got to start writing tracks. Now, because these are quite experimental things, just listening to it, you probably won't know what's going on. So I had to write a full page about each piece, explaining the process that I was doing. I had to create some low-quality MP3s with some watermarks in, so I could put it on a few dodgy sites. I had to create the high-quality ones for Apple. And putting them in an order. The order I came up with is not the order that they're in the album. The order that they're in the album is ones that I thought worked best, with shorter tracks, then longer tracks, and a kind of an actual sort of ebb and flow to it. But I've probably still got it wrong. And this is the sort of track information I had to write. Yeah, I was not kidding. It is computery. So after all of this, I still had to release it. So it's available on Apple and Bandcamp. I would say go and get it from Bandcamp if you want to listen to it, because I'd rather get no money than Apple get some, I guess. So the conclusions are it's 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. But I found for this, it's 1%, because there are so many false avenues. You start going down one way, and so often you just turn back and go, this is just not working, I have to try something else. You've got to learn arrangements, which I've never had to do before. Music business is painful. It's called a business for a reason. It's because only people that like doing business are in it. And that opening section of that piece that has got the orchestra tuning up, I put one of my pieces on YouTube as an example piece, and they said, you're using samples. No, it's an orchestra tuning up. It's from a sample library I own, but they still blocked it. So I had to go back and re-edit and do more stuff. And then obviously be realistic about the stuff. I think it's the best symphony I've ever written. I mean, of the one symphony I've written, it's the best symphony I've written. But no one else is probably going to think that. So I can't go and think, I've done it. Where's my island? Which island shall I buy off Richard Branson this time? Realistically speaking, there's only about 5 people that do this stuff. So let me update my FOSDEM scorecard. There we go. And I've probably got 1 minute for questions. Do I have 1 minute for questions?
Thanks for your talk. Do we have some questions? Yeah. Okay.
Have you tried making also music with deep neural networks?
Have I tried making music with neural networks? Not yet. But if there's a feedback form, say Steve was very good, and maybe next year he'll have some neural nets. It's a thing I've seen, I like the look of, but I've not tried it yet.
What beer are you drinking?
What beer? This is Waterloo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think the advantage of making music like this is, or are? What are the advantages? Why create music like this?
So why create music like this is probably the easier question to answer, is because I can. I had this idea. I thought, what does it sound like? This is the only way I'm going to hear it. No one else is going to do it unless I do it. So I went away and did it. Maybe if I waited long enough, someone else probably in this room would have the same idea, and then they'd write that symphony for me. But because no one was, I did it. The first question of what are the benefits of doing it this way, I don't know. It's the only way I know of making that music, because it is so precise, the timing is so accurate, it has to be done this way.
Do you think you're expressing something of yourself in this?
Do I think I'm expressing myself in this? Yes, but it might not be an emotional expression. It might be the intellectual expression of, look how clever I am because I can write this library and I can come up with these clever ideas. There might not be an emotional thing, and you might not get any emotional state from this type of music.
Thanks, everybody.
All done?
Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks again.
Thank you.